Jake Morrison stood outside the supply shed and counted the nutrition packs for the third time. The numbers did not change. 27 packs remained for the 143 people in Camp Delta 7. Each pack could feed one adult for 1 day or one child for 2 days. Jake ran his fingers through his graying hair and felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on his shoulders. 3 years had passed since Earth burned. The Veltari had not caused the destruction, but they had not helped either. When the refugee ships arrived at their world of Kepler 442b, the Alien Council had grudgingly allowed humans to settle in designated zones. They provided basic shelter and minimal food supplies, treating the human survivors like unwanted guests who had overstayed their welcome. Jake had been a Marine sergeant before everything fell apart. Now he managed Camp Delta 7, one of the last human settlements on this strange world. The red sun cast everything in an orange glow that never felt quite right. The gravity was lighter than Earth, making everyone feel slightly off balance. The air tasted metallic, though it was breathable enough. The camp consisted of prefabricated shelters arranged in neat rows. Families crowded into spaces meant for half their number. Children who should have been in school instead helped there. Parents with daily survival tasks. Adults who once had careers now spent their days maintaining equipment and rationing supplies that grew smaller each week. Lisa Carter approached the supply shed. She was the camp's medical officer and nutritionist, a thin woman with kind eyes who somehow always found reasons to smile. "How bad is it today, Jake?" she asked quietly. Jake showed her the count sheet. Lisa's face went pale. "This won't last 3 days for the adults. Maybe a week if we give it all to the children." "I know," Jake said. He looked across the camp where children played in the dusty common area. Danny Kim, 8 years old, was teaching Sophie Martinez, who was 6, how to skip stones with pieces of broken concrete. Ben Taylor, 10 and the unofficial leader among the kids, was organizing a game of tag for the younger ones. These children had lost their homes, their planet, their futures, yet they still found ways to laugh and play. "We need to make a decision," Lisa said. "The transport from the Veltari Food Distribution Center isn't due for another 10 days. Maybe longer if they decide we're not worth the fuel." Jake nodded. He had already made his decision, but saying it out loud would make it real. "Give it to the kids, all of it. Jake, you haven't eaten in 2 days already. Neither have most of the adults. We can't survive on nothing." "We're not surviving anyway," Jake said. "Look around. We're dying slowly instead of quickly. At least this way, the children have a chance." Lisa started to argue, but Jake held up his hand. "I'm not discussing this. The kids get the food." End of story. That evening, Jake called everyone to the common area. The adults gathered in a loose circle, their faces showing the strain of constant hunger and worry. The children sat cross-legged in the front, looking up at Jake with trusting eyes that made his heart ache. "Friends," Jake began, keeping his voice steady, "we have enough food for about a week. I'm distributing it to our youngest residents. They need it more than we do." Murmurs of protest rose from the adult crowd. "Jake, that's not fair to you," called out Maria Santos, a former teacher. "You've been giving up your rations for days." "We all have children to feed," added Robert Chun, holding his daughter's hand. "But the adults need food too, or we won't be able to take care of anyone." Jake raised his voice slightly. "This isn't up for debate. The decision is made." He walked to where the children sat and pulled out his own nutrition pack, the last one he had saved. It was supposed to be his dinner, his breakfast, and probably his lunch tomorrow. Instead, he broke it into small pieces and handed them out to Danny, Sophie, Ben, and the other children nearby. "Mr. Jake, no," Danny protested, trying to hand the food back. You need to eat too. I'm fine, kiddo, Jake lied. This tastes better. When I share it with you guys anyway. Sophie looked up at him with wide brown eyes. Are you sure? Mom says sharing is good, but not if it makes you sick. Jake knelt down to her level. Your mom is right about sharing being good. Sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices so kids can grow up strong and healthy. That's what we're supposed to do. Ben, who was older and understood more about their situation, stared at Jake for a long moment. You're giving us your food because you think we might not get more, aren't you? Jake met the boy's gaze honestly. I'm giving you my food because taking care of you is the most important job I have. Nothing else matters as much as making sure you're okay. The adults watched in silence as Jake continued distributing his meal. Among the children, some had tears in their eyes. Others looked angry, frustrated by their helplessness. A few nodded approvingly, understanding what Jake was trying to do, even if they disagreed with his methods. Unknown to anyone in the camp, a figure watched from the hills above. Zareth had been observing the human settlements for weeks, trying to understand these strange refugees. Her people, the Veltari, valued strength and efficiency above all else. They provided for their young because it made evolutionary sense, not because of emotional attachments. But what Zareth witnessed that evening challenged everything she thought she knew about human nature. She watched Jake Morrison, clearly weakened by hunger, give away his last food to children who are not even his own offspring. In Veltari society, such behavior would be seen as foolish waste. Leaders took what they needed first, then distributed the remainder based on usefulness to the community. Yet as Zareth observed the human children carefully dividing Jake's meal among themselves, making sure even the smallest ones got equal shares, she began to see something different. These young humans were learning not just to take what they were given, but to care for each other the way their adult leader cared for them. When Jake finally stood up, his legs shaky from hunger and fatigue, Ben Taylor stood up too. Tomorrow, we share our food with the grown-ups, the boy announced to the other children. Mr. Jake takes care of us, so we take care of him. The other children nodded solemnly, understanding that they had witnessed something important, even if they could not fully explain what it was. Jake smiled and ruffled Ben's hair. Just worry about growing up strong, kiddo. That's all I need from you. As the crowd dispersed and families returned to their shelters for the night, Zareth remained hidden on the hillside. She had come to observe human weakness and report back to the council about whether these refugees were worth the resources they consumed. Instead, she had witnessed something that would change her understanding of strength entirely. Zareth returned to the Veltari capital city before dawn, her mind racing with questions she could not answer. The gleaming spires of her people's civilization rose into the orange sky like crystal needles, each one a testament to Veltari efficiency and order. Everything had its place, everyone had their function, and resources flowed to where they would do the most good for the greatest number. She walked through the pristine corridors of the government complex, past murals depicting great Veltari leaders of the past. Each image showed the same thing: strong individuals taking what they needed to lead, surrounded by loyal followers who benefited from their leader's strength. It was the natural order, the way things had always been, but the scene she had witnessed at the human camp did not fit this model at all. High Counselor Mergen, her father, was already in his office reviewing reports when Zareth entered. He was a tall, imposing figure, even by Veltari standards, with the blue-gray skin and elongated features that marked their species. His eyes, large and dark, looked up from his work with mild curiosity. You return early from your observation. Duty's daughter. I trust the human situation remains manageable? Zareth hesitated. How could she explain what she had seen? In their language, there was no word for what Jake Morrison had done. The closest translation would be wasteful leadership, which carried negative implications. Father, I observed something unusual at Camp Delta 7. The human leader, Jake Morrison, gave his final nutrition ration to the young ones in his group, not to his own offspring, but to all the children present. Murden set down his report and studied his daughter's face. You seem troubled by this. Surely you understand that this demonstrates exactly why the humans are failing as a species. Their leader lacks the wisdom to preserve his own strength for the good of the group. But the children responded by organizing themselves more effectively. Zarath continued. They began sharing resources among themselves without being told. The older ones took responsibility for the younger ones. It was as if his sacrifice created a stronger social bond within the group. Temporary emotional response, Murden dismissed. When hunger sets in properly, they will revert to competition for resources. It is biological imperative. Zareth wanted to argue, but she lacked the words to express what she had truly seen. In Veltari society, leaders demonstrated their worth by taking what they needed and distributing the rest based on merit and usefulness. A leader who gave away his own survival resources would be seen as unfit to lead, and others would quickly replace him. Yet Jake Morrison's position seemed to have grown stronger after his act of sacrifice, not weaker. Meanwhile, at Camp Delta 7, Jake Morrison struggled to stand up from his sleeping mat. The hunger had moved beyond discomfort into genuine weakness. His hands shook as he tried to dress, and dark spots danced at the edges of his vision. He had not eaten in 3 days now, surviving on small sips of water and sheer determination. Carter knocked on his shelter wall. Jake, are you awake? I have the morning medical checks to do, and I wanted to examine you first. I'm fine, Jake called back, though his voice was noticeably weaker than usual. Check on the kids first. Make sure they're processing the nutrition packs okay. The kids are fine because you fed them, Lisa said, entering the shelter without waiting for permission. She took one look at Jake and immediately pulled out her medical scanner. You're not fine. Your blood sugar is dangerously low, and you're showing early signs of malnutrition. It's temporary, Jake insisted, though he had to sit back down on his sleeping mat because standing made him dizzy. The next supply drop will come eventually. Lisa studied the scanner readings and shook her head. Jake, you can't lead anyone if you collapse. Let me give you one of the children's rations. Absolutely not. Then let me contact the Veltari directly and request emergency supplies. Jake looked up at her sharply. We've tried that before. They consider us low priority. Begging won't change that. What Jake did not know was that help was already being considered, though from an unexpected source. Zarath had spent the morning researching human behavior patterns in the Veltari databases. Most of the information was clinical and detached, focusing on biological needs and social structures. But one report caught her attention. It was written by a Veltari anthropologist who had studied human refugees from other disasters throughout their history. The report noted that humans often exhibited irrational protective behaviors toward their young, which sometimes resulted in temporary increases in group cohesion and resource sharing efficiency. The report dismissed these behaviors as evolutionary, remnants that ultimately hindered human survival in resource-scarce environments. But as Zarath read more carefully, she began to see a different pattern. Groups of humans who exhibited these behaviors often survived longer and recovered more quickly from disasters than groups that did not. She made a decision that would have shocked her father if he had known about it. That afternoon, while officially conducting routine supply route inspections, Zarath arranged for several cases of nutrition packs to be accidentally dropped near Camp Delta-7. Ben Taylor found the supplies first. The 10-year-old had been exploring the area around the camp, partly out of curiosity and partly because he was trying to find anything edible growing in the alien soil. When he saw the unmarked cases sitting in a small clearing, he ran back to get the other children. "Sophie, Danny, come quick," he whispered urgently. "There's food out there, lots of it." The children gathered around the cases, afraid to touch them at first. They had learned to be suspicious of anything that seemed too good to be true. "Maybe it's a trap," Sophie said quietly. "Maybe the aliens want to see what we do with it." Danny, who was usually the most optimistic of the group, stared at the nutrition packs through the clear case sides. "Maybe it's a gift. Maybe someone wants to help us. We should tell Mr. Jake," Ben decided. "He'll know what to do." But when they returned to camp and explained what they had found, Jake was too weak to walk out to investigate immediately. Lisa had to help him stand up, and even then he moved slowly and carefully. "It could be a test," Jake said, echoing Sophie's concern. "The Veltari might want to see if we'll take supplies that don't belong to us. Or it could be a miracle." Lisa countered, "Either way, we need those supplies. The children need you healthy, Jake. We all do." As evening approached, Jake finally agreed to let Ben and Lisa retrieve the cases. They found not just nutrition packs, but also basic medical supplies and water purification tablets. Everything was unmarked, with no indication of where it had come from. That night, as Jake ate his first full meal in days, he noticed something different about the camp. The children were more organized, taking turns at tasks without being asked. The adults were working together more efficiently, inspired by the children's example. Even the elderly residents seemed to have more energy and hope. "It's like we're becoming a real community," Lisa observed, sitting beside Jake as they watched the children play in the evening light. "Whatever you started when you shared that meal, it's growing." Jake nodded slowly. He could feel his strength returning with the food, but more than that, he could see something changing in the people around him. They were no longer just survivors competing for resources. They were becoming something else, something stronger. High above in her observation post, Zareth watched the human camp and began to understand that she had witnessed something far more significant than a simple act of hunger-driven desperation. She had seen the birth of something her people had never learned to create: leadership through service, strength through sacrifice, and community built on care rather than competition. The first time in her life, Zareth began to question whether the Veltari way was the only way to build a successful society. The storm came without warning on a Tuesday morning, turning the orange sky black with swirling dust and debris. The winds on Kepler 442b were different from Earth storms, moving in spiraling patterns that could knock down a full-grown adult and tear apart anything not properly secured. Jake Morrison was checking the shelter tie-downs when the first powerful gust hit the camp. "Everyone to the storm shelters," Jake shouted over the growing wind. "Leave everything except emergency supplies." The Veltari had built the storm shelters. When the first human refugees arrived, though they were clearly designed for efficiency rather than comfort, each concrete bunker could hold 20 people in cramped conditions, with basic air filtration and enough space to wait out the worst weather. Jake moved from shelter to shelter, making sure families were accounted for. The Martinez family was missing their youngest daughter. The elderly Peterson couple needed help walking against the wind. A group of teenagers was trying to save some of their personal belongings instead of getting to safety. "Leave it," Jake ordered the teenagers. "Your lives matter more than stuff." By the time Jake finished his checks, the storm had reached full intensity. The wind howled like a living thing, and debris flew through the air fast enough to seriously injure anyone caught outside. Jake ran toward the nearest storm shelter, but a piece of torn metal sheeting caught him across the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing to the ground. Pain shot through his left arm and side. Jake tried to get up, but his vision blurred and his legs would not respond properly. The hunger and exhaustion of the past weeks had left him weaker than he realized, and the impact had taken the last of his reserves. Through the storm noise, Jake heard voices calling his name. Small voices. "Mr. Jake, Mr. Jake, where are you?" Ben Taylor emerged from the swirling dust, followed by Danny Kim and Sophie Martinez. The three children were holding hands to stay together, leaning into the wind as they searched for their missing. "Camp leader." "Get to the shelter," Jake managed to say, though his voice was barely audible over the storm. "It's not safe out here." "We're not leaving you," Ben said firmly. The 10-year-old boy knelt beside Jake and tried to help him sit up. Benny, grab his other arm. "Sophie, you watch for more flying stuff." "Kids, please," Jake protested weakly. "I'll be fine. Just get yourselves safe." "No," Sophie said with the determined stubbornness that only a 6-year-old could manage. "You took care of us, so now we take care of you." More children appeared through the storm. Maria Santos's 8-year-old son, Carlos. The Wong twins, both 9 years old. Even tiny Emma Foster, barely 5, clutching a water bottle she had brought. From her family's emergency supplies dot, they formed a protective circle around Jake's fallen form, their small bodies creating a barrier against the worst of the wind and debris. Ben organized them like a miniature military unit, directing the older children to create windbreaks, while the younger ones shared their emergency rations with Jake. "Just little sips," Danny instructed, holding a nutrition drink to Jake's lips. "Mom says when someone is hurt, you give them small amounts first." Jake wanted to refuse, to tell them they needed those supplies for themselves, but he could barely speak. The children were risking their lives to stay with him when they should have been safe in the storm shelters. He had to recover enough strength to get them all to safety. High on her observation ridge, Zareth watched the storm through her enhanced vision equipment. She had come to monitor how the humans handled crisis situations, expecting to document their collapse under pressure. Instead, she witnessed something that made her hands tremble as she adjusted her viewing scope. The human children were not abandoning their weakened leader. They were protecting him with their own bodies, sharing their resources with him just as he had shared his resources with them. In Veltari society, injured leaders were replaced immediately by stronger individuals. The pack always moved on, leaving the weak behind for the good of the group. But these human young were doing something unprecedented. They were choosing to risk their own safety to preserve their leader, even though he could no longer provide for them in return. Commander Vexul appeared beside Zareth, his military scanner sweeping the human settlement. "The storm will destroy most of their temporary structures," he observed with professional detachment. "This may solve the refugee problem naturally. There are children down there," Zareth said quietly. "Weak ones, by the look of it," Vexul replied. "Their leader appears to be injured or ill. Natural selection will take its course." Zareth watched Ben Taylor organizing the other children into shifts, making sure Jake stayed conscious and hydrated while they waited for the storm to pass. She saw Sophie Martinez giving up her own emergency blanket to keep Jake warm. She observed Danny Kim sharing his family's medical supplies without being asked. "Commander," Zareth said carefully, "what would happen in our society if a pack leader fell during a storm?" "The pack would select a new leader immediately and move on," Vexul answered. "Only the strongest survive. Why do you ask?" "The human children are not selecting a new leader. They are protecting their injured one." Vexul focused his scanner on the group of children surrounding Jake. Foolish behavior. They are reducing their own survival chances for an individual who can no longer contribute to the group. Zareth said nothing, but she continued watching. As the storm raged for hours, she saw the children take turns staying awake to monitor Jake's condition. She saw them rationing their water and food to make sure everyone, including their injured leader, had something to sustain them. She saw them working together with a coordination and purpose that impressed even her military-trained observer. Most remarkably, she saw Jake Morrison, even in his weakened state, continuing to guide and protect the children around him. When Emma Foster became frightened by a particularly loud crash of debris, Jake found the strength to pull her close and comfort her. When Carlos Santos cut his hand on a piece of broken plastic, Jake used his own shirt to bandage the wound. Relationship between the human leader and his young followers was unlike anything in Valtari experience. They were not simply following the strongest individual or competing for his favor. They had formed something that transcended traditional pack dynamics. When the storm finally passed 6 hours later, rescue teams from the camp found Jake and the children still huddled together in their protective circle. Jake was conscious, but barely, kept alive by the careful attention of his young guardians. The children were exhausted, but unharmed, having successfully shielded both themselves and their leader from the worst of the storm. Lisa Carter arrived with the medical team and immediately began treating Jake's injuries and dehydration. "How did you manage to stay safe out here?" she asked Ben while she worked. "We made a plan," Ben explained simply. "Mr. Jake always makes plans to keep us safe, so we made a plan to keep him safe too. It was scary," Sophie added, "but we stayed together, like Mr. Jake taught us." As Jake was carried to the medical shelter, the children walked alongside the stretcher, reluctant to leave his side, even now that the immediate danger had passed. Other adults in the camp watched in amazement. They had seen the children grow, more confident and organized over the past weeks. But this level of loyalty and cooperation seemed almost beyond their years. That evening, as Jake rested in the medical shelter with his injuries properly treated, Ben Taylor and the other children gathered around his bed. They had brought drawings they had made during the storm, pictures of their protective circle with Jake safe in the middle. "We decided something while we were waiting," Ben announced solemnly. "We're going to be your helpers from now on." "Like a real team," Jake smiled weakly. "You already are my helpers, kiddo. You always have been." "No different," Danny explained. "Before, you took care of us. Now we take care of each other and you too, like a family." Sophie nodded enthusiastically. Families don't leave people behind when they get hurt. They help them get better. From her position on the observation ridge, Zareth recorded everything. In her official report, though she knew her superiors would not understand the significance of what they had witnessed. The human children had not just protected their leader during a crisis. They had demonstrated something that Valtari science insisted was impossible. A social structure based on mutual care rather than competitive. Hierarchy. As she prepared to return to the capital with a report, Zareth made another unauthorized decision. She arranged for additional medical supplies to be included in the next official supply drop to Camp Delta 7. She told herself it was simply logical efficiency, ensuring that the human leader recovered quickly so the group would remain stable. But, privately, she was beginning to understand that she had witnessed the formation of something remarkable, a pack bound together not by strength or dominance, but by the radical idea that everyone deserved protection and care, especially when they were most vulnerable. The summons came 3 days after Jake had recovered enough to walk without assistance. A formal Valtari messenger arrived at Camp Delta 7 with an official scroll bearing the seal of the High Council. Jake read it twice, not quite believing what he was seeing. "They want me to appear before the council," he told Lisa Carter, his voice filled with confusion. "They're offering me something they call a leadership evaluation opportunity." Lisa frowned as she examined the scroll. The Valtari writing was elegant but cold, each symbol precisely formed. "What does that mean exactly?" "I have no idea," Jake admitted, "but refusing probably isn't an option." What Jake did not know was that his summons was the result of a heated Debate in the Valtari capital. Zareth had presented her observations to her father, describing Jake's leadership style and the remarkable loyalty he had inspired among the human children. Her report had created an unprecedented situation. A young Valtari, challenging the Council's assessment of human capabilities. That High Counselor Murden had been skeptical at first. You claim this human demonstrated true pack leadership by sacrificing his own resources for non-related young. This contradicts everything we know about human social structures. I documented everything, Father, Zareth replied, showing him her detailed recordings. The human children not only accepted his leadership, but actively protected him when he was vulnerable. They formed what can only be described as a genuine pack bond. Commander Thixul, who had been present during the storm observations, added his own reluctant confirmation. The tactical coordination displayed by the human young was actually quite impressive. They maintained formation and resource distribution under extreme stress. The debate that followed divided the council. Some members argued that Zareth's observations were meaningless, that humans were simply exhibiting temporary emotional responses that would fade when truly tested. Others wondered if perhaps the Valtari had underestimated human social capabilities. Finally, Elder Vexthara, the oldest member of the council, proposed a solution that satisfied no one but intrigued everyone. Let us test this human's leadership directly. Present him with the kind of choice that reveals true leadership capacity. 2 days later, Jake Morrison found himself standing in the great council chamber of the Valtari capital, surrounded by alien architecture that seemed designed to make visitors feel small and insignificant. The ceiling soared high above him, covered with murals depicting Valtari military victories and social achievements. The council members sat on elevated platforms, looking down at him with large, dark eyes that revealed nothing of their thoughts. High Counselor Murden spoke first, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. Jake Morrison of Camp Delta 7, you have been brought before this council to address questions about human leadership capacity and resource allocation capabilities. Jake stood as straight as he could, though his recent injuries still caused him some discomfort. I'm honored by your attention, Counselor, though I'm not sure why my leadership matters to your people. Your actions have been observed and documented, Murden continued. Our observers report that you have demonstrated what they interpret as pack leadership behavior among your people. Zareth stepped forward from her position among the junior council members. Jake recognized her as Valtari, but he had never seen her before. She was younger than the other council members, with the characteristic blue-gray skin and elongated features of her species. But something in her large eyes seemed different, more curious than cold. Jake Morrison, Zareth said formally, do you accept responsibility for the welfare of all humans in your settlement? Yes, Jake answered without hesitation. That's my job. And would you accept responsibility for the welfare of humans beyond your immediate settlement, if given the resources and authority to do so? Jake considered this carefully. The question felt like a trap, but he could not see how. If I could help more people, yes, I would want to do that. Commander Thixul stood up from his platform. Then we present you with a test of your leadership capacity. You may choose to accept a position as coordinator of human refugee affairs for this planet. You would have access to significantly increased resources and the authority to make decisions affecting all human settlements. Jake felt a spark of hope. Better resources could mean better lives for everyone in the camps, not just his own people. What would be required of me? You must choose which human settlements receive priority for resource allocation. Elder Vexthara explained, her ancient voice carrying clearly through the chamber. Food supplies, medical equipment, construction materials, and transportation. Access are limited. You must decide which communities receive full support, which receive partial support, and which receive minimal maintenance only. The hope in Jake's chest turned cold. You're asking me to choose which groups of people get to thrive and which ones get left behind. We are asking you to demonstrate the kind of strategic thinking that true leadership requires, Merton clarified. Resources are finite. Leaders must allocate them efficiently to ensure the greatest good for the greatest number. Jake looked around the council chamber, studying the faces of the Veltari representatives. They seemed genuinely curious about his response, as if this were a fascinating experiment, rather than a decision that would affect thousands of lives. How many human settlements are there on your world? Jake asked. 17 functional communities, ranging in size from your own Camp Delta 7, with 143 residents, to the larger settlement of Haven Ridge, with nearly 800 people, Bixul provided. Total human population, approximately 4,000 individuals. Jake was quiet for several long moments, thinking through the implications. If he refused this position, the Veltari would continue their current minimal support system, and all the settlements would continue struggling with inadequate resources. If he accepted, but played their game of choosing winners and losers, he would doom some communities to slow starvation, while others prospered. But there might be a third option. I have a counterproposal, Jake said finally. Instead of maintaining 17 separate struggling communities, what if we consolidated into one larger settlement? Combine all the human populations, pool all the resources, and create a single sustainable community that could eventually become self-sufficient. The council members exchanged glances. This was clearly not the response they had expected. You would abandon the established settlements? Zareth asked. I would relocate everyone to a single location where we could work together more effectively, Jake corrected. 17 small groups competing for limited resources will always be vulnerable. One larger community sharing resources and coordinating labor could actually contribute to your planet's economy instead of just consuming aid. Elder Vexthara leaned forward with interest. You propose to take full responsibility for the success or failure of this consolidated community? Yes, Jake said firmly. If you're willing to give us the chance to prove ourselves, I'll take complete responsibility for the outcome. The council members began speaking among themselves in their own language, rapid exchanges that Jake could not follow. Finally, Merton raised his hand for silence. This proposal is unprecedented. You are asking us to trust you with the welfare of your entire species on our world. The resource commitment would be substantial, and failure would mean the loss of all human settlements, rather than just some of them. Jake nodded. I understand the stakes, but I won't be the person who decides which children get food and which children go hungry. Either we all make it together, or we fail together. As if summoned by his words, footsteps echoed in the council chamber. Ben Taylor, Danny Kim, and Sophie Martinez appeared at the entrance, followed by several other children from Camp Delta 7. They looked tiny in the vast space, but they walked forward with determination. How did they get here? Bixul demanded. Zareth looked uncomfortable. I may have mentioned to my transport pilot that observing human young might be valuable for our behavioral studies. Ben Taylor stepped forward and looked up at the elevated council platforms without fear. Excuse me, but we came to speak for Mr. Jake. This is highly irregular, Merton protested. Please, Sophie said in her clear 6-year-old voice. We want to tell you about our leader. Danny nodded seriously. Mr. Jake teaches us that taking care of everyone is more important than having enough for yourself. He shared his food with use when he was hungry, and we helped him when he was hurt. He makes sure nobody gets left behind, Ben added. Ever. That's what real leaders do. The council chamber fell silent. Jake felt his heart swelling with pride and concern. These children had somehow traveled across the planet to support him, not because he had asked them to, but because they believed in what he was trying to accomplish. Elder Vexthara studied the children with ancient, thoughtful eyes. Young humans. You would trust this adult with the welfare of thousands of your people? He already takes care of thousands of people, Sophie replied matter-of-factly. He just does it one person at a time. Zareth stepped forward again, her voice carrying new conviction. Honored council members, I have observed this human's leadership extensively. He does not lead through strength or dominance. He leads. 6 months later, Jake Morrison stood on a hill overlooking what had once been empty grassland and was now home to nearly 3,000 humans. Haven Colony stretched out below him in the golden light of Kepler 442b's setting sun, its neat rows of permanent structures and thriving gardens, a testament to what people could accomplish when they worked together toward a common goal. The consolidation had not been easy. Of the 17 original settlements, 12 had chosen to join the new community. 5 had decided to remain independent, and Jake respected their choice, even though it meant fewer people to share the work and resources. Those who came brought different skills, different perspectives, and different ideas about how things should be done. Lisa Carter approached from the direction of the medical center, carrying a tablet full of health statistics that would have seemed impossible 6 months ago. The nutrition levels are holding steady across all age groups, she reported with satisfaction. We haven't had a single case of malnutrition in the past 2 months. Jake smiled as he watched children playing in the community garden, their laughter mixing with the sounds of adults finishing their daily work shifts. What about the agricultural output? Beyond our projections, Lisa replied. The vertical farming systems are producing 30% more than we estimated. We'll actually have surplus food to trade with the Veltari settlements by next season. The farming success had been one of many surprises during the colony's development. Jake had organized work teams based on the same principles he had used. At Camp Delta 7, everyone contributed according to their abilities. Everyone received according to their needs, and no one got left behind. The result had been innovation and efficiency that impressed even the Veltari observers. Ben Taylor, now 11 and serving as one of the youth coordinators, ran up the hill toward them. His role had evolved naturally from his leadership among the children at the original camp to helping organize activities and education programs for nearly 400 young people in the colony. Mr. Jake, the evening council meeting is about to start, Ben announced. Zaret H. is there with some kind of special report from the Veltari government. Jake nodded and followed Ben down the hill toward the community center. The evening councils had become a tradition in Haven Colony, a time when anyone could bring up concerns, suggest improvements, or share news that affected the whole community. Jake had learned that leading 3,000 people required a lot more listening and a lot less individual decision-making than leading a few hundred. The community center was packed with residents, their faces showing the health and confidence that came from meaningful work and food security. Jake took his usual seat in the circle, not elevated above the others, but simply part of the group. Zareth sat nearby, her blue-gray features more relaxed than they had been during those first formal council meetings months ago. Friends, Jake began, using his customary greeting, Zareth has news from the Veltari High Council. I think we all want to hear what they've decided about our future here. Zaret H. stood up, holding an official document that bore the seal of her government. Jake felt his heart rate increase despite himself. Everything they had built could still be taken away if the council deemed their experiment a failure. The High Council has completed its evaluation of Haven Colony, Zareth announced. After 6 months of observation and assessment, they have reached several conclusions. The community center fell completely silent. Children stopped fidgeting. Adults stopped whispering. And everyone focused on the young Veltari, who had become their advocate and friend over the past months. First, Zareth continued, the council acknowledges that Haven Colony has achieved full self-sufficiency in food production, basic manufacturing, and energy generation. You have exceeded all projected benchmarks for community development. A cheer went up from the assembled residents, but Zareth held up her hand for continued silence. Second, the council notes that your community has established trade relationships with 3 Veltari settlements, providing goods and services that benefit both species. Your innovations in desert agriculture have been adopted by several of our own farming communities. More cheers, louder this time. Jake felt some of the tension leaving his shoulders, but he waited for the final verdict. Third, Zareth said, her voice carrying a note of pride, the council has officially recognized Haven Colony as an independent settlement with full planetary citizenship rights. You are no longer classified as refugees. You are residents of Kepler 442b with all the protections and opportunities that status provides. The community center erupted in celebration. Adults hugged each other, children jumped up and down, and even some of the more reserved residents were openly crying with relief. Jake felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they had accomplished. Together, but Zareth was not finished. There is one more announcement. The Veltari High Council has asked me to extend an invitation to Jake Morrison to serve as an advisor on interspecies community development. They want to study your methods and potentially apply them to other refugee situations throughout our territory. Jake was stunned. The same alien government that had once viewed humans as an unwanted burden now wanted to learn from their approach to building communities. Danny Kim, now 9 and still one of the most optimistic residents of the Foray colony, stood up with the confidence that came from living in a place where everyone's voice mattered. Does that mean other people who lost their homes might get help like we got help? Zareth smiled at the boy who had grown from a frightened refugee child into a confident young citizen. That is exactly what it means, Danny. Your community has become a model for how different species can work together successfully. Sophie Martinez, now 7 and serving as one of the children's representatives on various colony committees, raised her hand. Mr. Jake, are you going to help other kids like us? Jake looked around the community center at the faces of people who had become his extended family. They had started with nothing but determination and the radical idea that everyone deserved care and protection. Now they had built something that could serve as an example for communities throughout the galaxy. If the Colony Council agrees, Jake said carefully, I would like to accept the Veltari invitation, but only if we can do it as a community effort. The things that work here work because we do them together, not because one person makes all the decisions. Elder Martinez, who had become the colony's senior advisor despite his advanced age, stood up slowly. I think I speak for everyone when I say we're proud to have our methods shared with others who need help. But we don't want to lose our leader. You won't lose me, Jake assured him. This is my home now. Our home. Whatever work I do with the Veltari will be done from here with all of you as partners. Lisa Carter stood up next. I have a practical question. If we're going to be helping establish other communities, we'll need more medical supplies, more educational resources, and more technical equipment. How do we make sure that helping others doesn't hurt our own people? Zareth pulled out another document. The Veltari government is prepared to provide substantial support for expansion of Haven Colony's infrastructure and resources. This would not be charity, but payment for services rendered as consultants and community development specialists. Ben Taylor looked thoughtful. So we get bigger and stronger, and we use that to help other people get bigger and stronger too? Exactly. Jake confirmed. We grow our capacity so we can share our knowledge without giving up our security. The discussion continued for another hour as residents asked questions, raised concerns, and made suggestions about how to move forward. It was the same process they had used to make every major decision in the colony. Everyone got to participate. Everyone's voice mattered, and they only moved forward when they had reached consensus. Finally, the vote was unanimous. Haven Colony would accept the partnership with the Veltari government and begin sharing their community development methods with other refugee populations throughout the sector. As the meeting ended, and people began returning to their homes, Jake found himself walking with Zareth toward the edge of the settlement. The alien who had once observed them from a distance was now one of his closest advisors and friends. "When I first started watching your camp," Zareth said quietly, "I thought I was documenting human failure. I expected to write reports about why your species was unsuited for survival on our world." Jake chuckled. "Instead, you ended up documenting something neither of our species had seen before. A society built on the principle that strength comes from caring for others rather than dominating them." Zareth agreed. "My people are still trying to understand how it works, but they can't argue with the results." They paused at the top of the hill where Jake had stood 6 months ago, looking down at empty land and imagining what could be built there. Now the lights of 3,000 homes twinkled below them, and the sounds of a thriving community drifted up on the evening breeze. "Do you think it will work on a larger scale?" Jake asked. "Building communities like this for thousands of different refugee groups across dozens of worlds?" Zareth was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "I think it will. Work wherever there are people willing to put the welfare of